Chapter 26. Emmett met Stephen near the top of Collins Street, the young policeman joining him in his car just in time to catch the end of the 4 p.m. news update on the radio. The man is described as being of Caucasian appearance with a slim build. Anyone with information is urged to contact Crime Stoppers immediately. Do you think he'll get much of a response? Stephen asked. Hopefully. Emmett turned the radio off before getting out and leading the way towards the street's grandest Victorian building. But it's a pretty vague description, isn't it? Taking the elevator to the 12th floor, they emerged at the empty reception of DGP Finance. Emmett watched his colleague scan the open-plan workspace, the sterile cubicles, the glass offices, and the sharp-looking workers. It's so... Stephen seemed lost for words. Fashionable? Modern? No. Cold. Emmett chuckled. You and Bianca would get along well. He grinned, remembering the homicide detective's utter loathing for the finance industry. Can I help you? A well-dressed woman stopped abruptly in front of them. We're here to see the company director. He's expecting us. The woman eyed them suspiciously before darting off to the furthest corner. As if we'd voluntarily spend time here. Emmett shook his head. Detectives. Jeff appeared in a slightly creased white shirt, his wide gesture exposing yellow tinges at the armpits. I do hope I'm not wasting your time with all this nonsense. It's all Sally's fault, of course. He pointed to where a sharp-nosed woman was staring determinedly at her computer. She's the one who insisted I phone you. I'm sure there's nothing sinister in all this. I'm glad you rang, Emmett said, following the man back to his expansive office and plonking himself down on one of the plush armchairs. I've spoken to Mrs. Knowles, Abby's mother, and she's quite concerned. What can you tell us about her movements of late? The director smiled, his thin lips curling upwards. Well, as I already said, she was one of our interns, and she'd been stationed on the reception desk the past few days. As you know, we were left short-staffed after that unfortunate incident with our previous secretary. Beside him, Emmett saw Stephen scowl. She was in yesterday? Yes, I believe so. I remember she arrived quite late. But then, she always seemed a little lax with punctuality, so there was nothing unusual about her behaviour, if that's what you mean. And there was nothing visibly wrong? She didn't seem upset or anxious? Not that I noticed. Did she leave with anyone? For some reason, Jeff appeared to blush before quickly composing himself. No, I can't say that she did. And was there anyone here that she was particularly friendly with? Co-workers she might associate with outside of the office? The director twiddled his fingers before answering. I don't believe so. No. Did you notice anything unusual about her mannerisms in the last few shifts? Was she taking any personal phone calls during work hours? Did she seem preoccupied with something going on in her life? I really wouldn't have a clue. Jeff raised his hands, as if summoning a higher power. As you can see, my office is a long way from her desk, and I certainly don't have time to monitor all our admin staff. Okay, well, if you think of anything else, please let me know. Emmett hoisted himself up out of the deep chair. We'll take a quick look at the security camera before we leave. Of course. The director smiled, then suddenly asked, "This latest incident, this disappearance, if you like, it won't make it into the press, will it? It's just not a great look for my business." Emmett gritted his teeth. "That's really not my highest concern at this stage." As they headed back through the office, Emmett had the odd sensation of being watched. Scanning the sea of bent heads at desks, he eventually made eye contact with the woman he knew to be Sally. "Hello," he whispered, leaning over her small cubicle. "Do you have time for a quick chat?" The woman's gaze darted to the director's office before returning to Emmett. "I have a call with an investor in about 10 minutes, so it needs to be quick." "I'm just wondering what made you so worried about your colleague, Abby Knowles. Are you aware of any troubles in her life?" Sally's mouth twisted. "There's nothing specific. In fact, I don't know her very well at all. I just get the sense that she's a bit lost, really." "Lost? What do you mean?" "I don't know how to explain it exactly. Most of the other women don't like the way she dresses, and flirts with all the men here. But I think she's sad. And lonely. She seems a little desperate. So eager to please." "I see." Emmett lowered his voice. "And when you say she flirts with the men here, is there anyone she's especially friendly with?" Sally shifted uncomfortably, and Emmett again noticed her eyes darting to the executive's offices. "I know she was having a bit of a fling with one of the senior staff members. His name's Marcus Wayton. He's best buddies with Jeff, and a real piece of work too. I wanted to warn her off him, but it didn't feel like my place to intervene. And I don't think she realised we all knew." "Right." Emmett glanced at Stephen, who already seemed to be scouring the office as though he'd recognised this mystery man. "And is Marcus here today?" Sally popped her head up over her cubicle, looking around quickly before ducking back down. "I can't see him. No." "Do you mind taking a quick look at this for me?" Emmett pulled out his phone and found a still shot of the security footage from the nursing home. Could this man be Marcus Wayton? The woman squinted, little wrinkles forming on the bridge of her nose as she considered the picture. "I've never seen him dressed like that, but it could be." "He resembles that sort of figure? That height?" "Yeah, definitely." "Okay, thanks for your help." Emmett indicated for his colleague to follow him back towards the reception area. After collecting what little surveillance footage there was, they stood at the vacant reception desk, waiting uselessly for assistance. Eventually, a stocky man with an absurdly trimmed mustache waltzed past, almost brushing Stephen aside. "Oh, excuse me." Emmett called him over, flashing his police badge. "We were just waiting to get some details from one of your staff members, but there doesn't seem to be anyone who's able to assist us. Would you mind looking up the phone number and home address for Marcus Wayton?" The man scrunched his forehead as though greatly perturbed, before dropping his laptop bag dramatically on the desk before them. "I suppose so," he muttered, tapping the computer keyboard aggressively. "Has he been in today?" "Haven't seen him." The grumpy man scribbled some details on a piece of paper. Emmett's hands turned clammy. "Don't tell me," Stephen murmured as they rushed back to the elevator. "We're heading to St. Kilda?" Emmett nodded, waiting for the doors to close before speaking. Marcus Waiton has a direct link to Rosemary Norman. He fits the physical profile of the man seen at the nursing home, and he lives in the area where we know our two murdered women were last seen. And now there's another woman missing. Yes. Emmett's stomach churned. We need to hurry. The sheets underneath her were damp and sticky. How long was he going to leave her here for? Was this it? Abby tried again to wiggle into a more comfortable position, but the rope was cutting into her wrists, making even the slightest movement painful. She tried, unsuccessfully, to get whatever was wrapped around her head off so that she could at least see where she was, but she'd only managed to suck the material into her mouth, making her feel like she was suffocating. She was having intense dizzy spells too, and even though she knew she was lying on a mattress, at times it was as though she was doing cartwheels through the clouds, with no idea which way was up and which way was down. How had this happened? All she'd wanted was to have an honest relationship, to sit down and work out a future for herself and her little boy. She'd never imagined things would end like this. What could she have possibly done to deserve such torture? As more tears dribbled hopelessly down her cheeks, Abby gave in to her despair. What would happen to her? And, most importantly, where was Spencer? At first, she'd been able to hear the sounds of his laboured breathing, his soft crying, and even, at one point, his cheeky laughter. But for a while now, she'd heard nothing. The silence more terrifying than anything she'd endured so far. Where was her son? What had he done with him? She closed her eyes as she wet the bed, yet again. It was hideous and humiliating, her clothes sticking to her, sodden and smelly. Abby howled, her tears turning to pleas for help, before strange, guttural groaning rolled from her mouth. For the briefest of moments, she was sure her prayers had been answered, hearing male voices somewhere nearby. But then they vanished. She was completely alone. No one was coming for her. No one would miss her. She kicked her legs furiously, the action, though futile, providing some sense of relief. She wiggled her wrists again before giving up. What would it be like for Spencer to grow up without her? Would he discover their true relationship? Would he forgive her for abandoning him? Sometimes, Abby thought, as a tear rolled onto her lower lip, it was as though her son knew of the secret bond they shared, moments when he'd look up at her with those big wide pupils. "Mum," his eyes would say. She moaned. Just when her life was getting back on track, she was about to have it all taken away. Her last moments to be spent in a pool of sweat, blood, and urine. The sound of heavy, slightly uneven footsteps from outside caused her to stiffen. She froze, barely breathing, blood pounding in her ears. He was coming. The sound of the key turning in the lock was just audible over the thumping beat of her heart. As she lay there, bracing herself for what was to come, Abby squeezed her eyes shut and imagined she was holding on to her son, the small body snuggled tight against her chest. A blast of cold air hit her as the door swung open. The man's footsteps neared. She pictured her son's face, his soft cheeks and blonde curls, his pale lips and gentle smile. In her hands she felt his tiny fingers wrapping around hers, just the way they had when he'd first arrived into the world. Why had she let him go? Her chest heaved as something cold was placed around her neck. It was too late for regrets now. With heavy breathing upon her, Abby felt the last of her tears spill across her face. She hadn't been the best mother, but she had always loved her son. And she knew she could do better if only she was given the chance.